All right, everyone. Welcome to Moshiach Update 2026, 5786, class number 4. So I'm very excited about this class in particular. We're beginning to really go into detail into the incredible, to flesh out and to develop the incredible ideas that we discussed in the first two classes as an outline, and this is already class number 4. Yesterday we began and explained the significance of the time that we're in right now, why everything is taking place in such an incredible way right now. But one of the things we were going to talk about, and I mentioned at the beginning, was that it is the year 2026, and that's what the name of the class is, Update for 2026, which 2026, first of all, has God's name in it, a very, very deep name of God, a very high name of God, the highest name, so to speak, related to redemption, related to the revelation of Moshiach, because in the days of Moshiach it says, V'nigla kvod Hashem, the glory of Hashem, the glory of Havaya, the glory of Yud Kei Vav Kei will be revealed, and countless verses that speak about that. The whole idea of Moshiach is God's revelation in this world, and particularly the name Havaya, which is God's transcendental self, is revealed within the world itself, within the nature of the world, and the marriage of creation with the Creator is discussed, and especially Kabbalistically and mystically, like this becomes everything. So the fact that the year is 2026, and as we're going to understand much better after the following 3 classes that we're going to learn, why it is so important that this is taking place not on the Jewish calendar, but on the secular calendar, because that itself is so much what the Messianic, the Mashiach element of it is, that it happens from the world itself, as we shall discuss. So one of the big things of 2026, a great element of 2026 is that America is going to have a big happy birthday, or when in 6 months from now, or 7 months from now, on July 4th, there is going to be the great celebration of 250 years since the Declaration of Independence, which is basically considered the founding day of the United States of America, in 1776. So now that we are in 2026, it's 250 years. Someone just told me they minted a new coin for that. And obviously they're going to do that, and it's going to be great. I was just in Philadelphia the other week, and I went to Independence Hall. We'll talk about that soon, where America was born, where the Declaration of Independence was signed. I went to the Liberty Bell. I hung out there for this particular reason, and I did my spiritual tricks over there. Maybe I'll share later. And I happened to be there for, nothing happens. Everything is by divine providence. I had a grandson, and they live in Philadelphia. And I'm particularly on that. The day before, I had the bris, circumcision of my grandson. I got to hold him by the circumcision, which is a very big thing. And the next day, I was in Independence Hall. They didn't let me in. They didn't let anybody in. It was closed. It's closed because in preparation for the great festivities that are going to take place in the birth at that place on July 4th. Some parts were open, which I did go into, which is called Congress Hall, where Congress was for a while. Okay, now let's not get distracted with that. Let's go jump right in. What I am super excited about is the milestone of the United States of America reaching 250. And that is not just by chance that happens now, while we're watching all the miracles, while we're watching the collapse of evil, all the empires of evil are falling apart. The United States is not part of that dark world that has to collapse. Quite on the contrary, the United States of America is a shining beacon of light, and it is a stepping stone for Moshiach, and Moshiach will honor the United States of America. And the United States of America, with the president and the government, whatever, are meant to play a massive role in the elevation of all of humanity to the time of Mashiach, as discussed already in the earlier classes. And that's what we're going to focus this class on. What is so special about America, and particularly that it reaches its 250th birthday, and the correlation of that to the Moshiach Moshiach energies, which means we will see a direct correlation between everything that was been the last 250 years of America with the flow of Moshiach in this world, which, as we were saying yesterday, is very much related to the Chabad dynasty. Whether you are one of the subscribers who believe that the Lubavitcher Rebbe could be Mashiach, is Mashiach or not, I'm not, I'm not looking to go there right now. It's discussed at other times, but one will have to agree either way to look at it that Chabad, Lubavitch, unless you're just plain, brainwashed in a negative way, then there's nothing to talk about. But generally, most people with their eyes open and so on and so forth realize the enormous contribution that the Lubavitch Rebbe's, beginning with the Alter Rebbe, both scholarly and teaching and inspiring and literally reaching the entire world like no one has ever done, to spread and to bring out the best of humanity and the best of the Jewish people, and to increase a connection of the Jewish people, and to bring the people that are the most alienated and most disconnected, and yet with infinite love and without any bit of judgment and so on and so forth, to be able to bring and elevate the Jewish people. It's incredible. So there's no question that Chabad is the forebearers for Moshiach. They carry the torch of Chassidus, and Chassidus, we were told by the Baal Shem Tov, is the forerunner for Mashiach, meaning that the teachings of Chassidus, the light of Chassidic teachings, is what is necessary to spread across the entire world in order for Mashiach to come. The only ones who really have made it their mission to spread Chassidism to the four corners of the earth, not just in space, but in terms of making Chassidism accessible to every person, or no matter which level you're in. This is a Chabad virtue, it's a Chabad mission, it's a Chabad energy. So in this sense, the Chabad Rebbeim are the preparers of the world for Mashiach. And who was passionate about Mashiach like the Chabad Rebbeim, culminating in the Rebbe's passion to the point that the Rebbe said about himself, they say about me that I am crazy about Mashiach. Let me rephrase that. When you say crazy, that really means I'm like a madman when it comes to Mashiach. I'm so determined. I have no boundaries and limitations in my drive. My drive is infinite. And you see, the Rebbe, his entire ambition and every moment of his was focused to bring the complete redemption. So what's really, really astounding is we're going to explore today the correlation between the Chabad dynasty and America. We're actually going to see that the birthday of Chabad and the birthday of America coincide in the same year. And then we're going to run a parallel flow. But before we go, there's some introductions, very important. And that is, why am I so excited about the United States of America, other than I've been born here and it's been pretty nice to me. But why the United States of America to be celebrated so much? And that is related. And why do we say that this is a society that precedes Mashiach? I know one of Mashiach's ideas, and not just one of Mashiach, but a primary focus of Mashiach, is Tikkun Olam, to fix the world. L'sakin Olam, to fix the world. To fix the world means to bring out the best in humanity. To fix the world means to bring godly consciousness to the world, to make the world aware of its purpose, to make humanity focused on its innate goodness, and that human beings should all be contributing to the overall betterment of this planet through whichever way every human being could contribute to that. God has gifted every human being to be created in the image of God. Every human being has what to share and what to give in all the various different aspects. The 8 billion people on the planet could and should contribute their unique touch that they can give to making this world a godlier, holier place. Mashiach is the culmination that brings that all together. When Mashiach will be here, completely revealed, the consciousness of God will prevail over all of humanity. Everybody will be enlightened, and everybody will seek more knowledge, and everybody will study Torah, and everybody will make it their objective to serve their Creator by shining the light of their soul. It's almost like we can say that God is going to make his presence in this world through dwelling inside each and every one of us as a conduit and as a channel for that infinite beauty coming through the prism of every human being, man, woman, and child, all races, all people, everybody shining and with that light. Moshiach that's the end goal, and that's the way the world will be, and then God is going to have his home in this world. That's the objective. Now let's take a look at where the United States fits into this. The United States is the first free society that has been established as to free the masses from the tyrannical, or what do you call it, governments, from the very oppressive governments that have been plagued humanity from the onset of history. Never has there been a governance, never has there been a nation that has been built on freedom for everyone. Now, of course, once the United States has established its principles, this kind of was imported across the world to a certain degree by almost all nations in the world, almost all modern nations of the world. The general idea is not exactly, it's never to the degree of America in its democracy and so on and so forth. But the point over here is, here's the thing. Just like, we'll take the example of this week's Torah portion, which is the Torah portion of Shemos, where we're learning how Moses is coming. God sends Moses to take the Jewish people out of Egypt. And the message to Pharaoh is, you got to let them out because God says they're my servants. If they're my servants and they're not your servants. You see, as long as the Jewish people play the most important role in making this world godly, God has chosen the Jewish people as the chosen nation. We play the most important role in guiding humanity towards this ultimate utopian, godly Moshiach world. But in order for us to do that, the first thing that was required, that the Jewish people needed to be liberated. Because as long as we are busy building pyramids to Pharaoh, we are not free to be able to build a temple for God. We're not free to be able to enlighten the world because we are being oppressed by the Egyptians who are using our labor for their own selfish interests and for their perverted whatever way of life. So just like, and the Jewish people serve as the prototype, just like it is with Israel, that Israel first needed to be liberated. Now, liberated means liberated from human oppression, so that we can all rise to the kingly state that we are as being kings, in the fact that God calls the Jewish people my kings, but the kings that are subjugated to the king of all kings. As the royal nation that are subjugated because we have no other authority over us, when we're not in exile, of course, other than God. Then comes exiles, and that kind of blocks it. And so then the Jewish people fall into the darkness of the rest of humanity, where there is oppression by the various different kings and governors and dictators and everyone else that has plagued humanity. So where can human beings express their and make the contributions that every human being? People need freedom of expression. People need to make a choice. Now, God wants that the light and the goodness that humanity will produce should be coming from a choice that they're making, not because they're forced to do so. So religious oppression doesn't either work. It has to be a free choice. A free choice meaning from our own intrinsic consciousness, from our own wisdom, from our own understanding, to appreciate that the world did not just happen on its own. There is a master, there is a creator, there's one source of everything, that he has a desire in his creating of the world. When we reckon, like kind of how Abraham came to that understanding. And then, of course, we have evil inclination, we have other desire, we have selfish desires, and that's the struggle. And we struggle to overcome our immediate gratification and to serve a higher purpose and to unify with the rest of the world as to serve community and to serve something beyond ourselves. That's the idea. Now, America brought that freedom to the world. So you can't have the fixed world of Mashiach without humanity being liberated. That's number one. Number two, what's beautiful about American democracy and American freedom is that it was based fundamentally on one nation under one God. That the Bill of Rights was written, that who gives us the rights for this freedom, all the freedoms that there are that the United States provides, is all because these are God-given rights. There is a deep recognition of a creator. What that does number one, it gives context. It gives the deeper inner context to all of this. But number two, it assures that even freedom would be there. Because if God is not at the source of it, if this is a human quality that people have come to an understanding and an agreement, but it's not based on a fundamental absolute truth, but just on the majority, whatever, making that decision, is based on a human type of a virtue, then we don't know where that's going to be tomorrow, because humans can be pretty stupid a lot of times. Even the masses, like we see, take a look at certain parts of this country that just elected like things that have been proven again and again and again and again, that communist ways of government run that governance into the literally into ruin and into utter destruction. And yet young people, impressionable people, you promise them free money and free housing and free everything, and you go to war against any type of anybody that's successful, who makes something out of, that works hard and makes a living, and you go and you fight that. It's crazy, but people can be stupid, and the masses can be some. So if you don't have a foundation that you cannot move away from, that foundation is based on an unshakable pillar, and that is a higher authority that has nothing to do with our mood. It has nothing to do with the way we think today. There is an understanding that there is a higher absolute truth, and that absolute truth is God's will. And when one recognizes that, then you have now, I'm not saying that many godly movements or which I'm not going to say godly because they're not godly. They weren't godly. They were oppressive in the name of God. That's true. But the United States did not do that. It gave freedom of religion, freedom to worship, the recognition of God, and that's at the state. That's at the center of it all. It's the nucleus of it all. That is the prototype, and that is what will lead the world. That elevates humanity, and that enabled where the world is today, that humans have kicked in and produced so much. You realize how much more productive we have become because we've given people the freedom to express themselves. It creates competition, but all of this is what, with all the entrepreneurship and all of this, has moved the world to where it is today, that soon, which is amazing, which is also Moshiach, is that soon humans are not going to have to be busy with all the chores of survival, because everything is going to become robotic, and everything is going to become dirt cheap, and mankind, all of mankind, is going to be able to turn their attention to something deeper and higher in life. So really, it's like amazing. Without the United States, all of this wouldn't be. So America is huge in its connection to Mashiach and to the rectified state of mankind. Obviously, the consciousness of God and the sense of purpose and the sense of mission, and the sense of virtue, meaning that the sense of not virtue, I'm looking for the sense of privilege that every human being is going to feel when after Mashiach is here, that God has chosen them to contribute something, to shine something, is going to be exponentially greater, and our motivations are going to become so much greater, and gone will be war and animosity and jealousy and all of that. So humanity is going to soar, and the world is going to soar by leaps and bounds that we don't even know. But we needed to bring the world to a certain state, and that's where the United States has been the beacon of light. That's where the United States has led the world, and the fact that the United States has survived the various different pushbacks and the various different things to the 250th birthday, which 250 we said is hugely substantial, is an incredible milestone for the entire world. That's my patriotic speech for today. Now let's see what's the underlying Jewish contribution to America. What's the relationship of Moshiach? Now, as discussed in earlier class, Moshiach doesn't just drop out of the sky. Moshiach is present in the world throughout all of history. Mashiach is an underlying current that's here. There's a Mashiach energy in the world that it's very subtle and quiet, but from its quiet place, it influences. And there are certain people who are the thread of the dynasty of King David, who carry that vibration, that powerful Mashiach energy to the world, and they spiritually and affect the world the world and caused the world to become more rectified and more sensitive and more refined. But that becomes super strong as we get to the last and final leg of that marathon. As we get to the final stretch, the energies of Moshiach, because the world has already reached a certain level of refinement, the energies of Moshiach become louder, stronger, more potent, more powerful, and everything becomes, you can see it, you can detect it. And here is where Chabad and the Alter Rebbe comes in, Chassidism in general, but primarily, as we said earlier, Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi. So I'd like to first, before we continue, I'd like to first lay out some really cool ideas, and then perhaps come back and try to explain it a little deeper. Why is it Lubavitch? Why is it Chabad? Why is it Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi? In the sense that, like, what's the direct connection of his teachings and to this rectified state of the world? You know what? Let's do that actually now. I think it'll fit better. It'll make things flow a little better, that we understand it fundamentally. Then we're going to go into the actual correlations, which is amazing. The idea is as follows. In Judaism itself, you know, there are different modes of being able to understand and appreciate what God wants of us and what's the mission and what's the purpose of the Jewish people. There are different mindsets within Judaism itself, and they're all correct, and they're all right, and they all have basis. But as you look in the different Jewish communities and the way they observe and the way they connect to God, you see that certain energies are highlighted in different groups and in different communities different. There's a certain mosaic, or there's a certain, colorful, the Jewish people, even I'm talking about religious Jews, and even observant Jews, observance can have a whole different sense of meaning and purpose in the various different groups, whether it's Chassidism, non-Chabad, and there is Chabad, and there is the Breslov group, and then there is, the general Haredi world, and there is the modern Orthodox world, and I'm not going to go into. There's a different flavor, and everything is beautiful, and everything creates, and everybody contributes because their energies and their devotions are different. It creates the perfect balance to move the Jewish people in a very healthy way forward, in a way that it keeps the Jewish people intact, without a question. But what I'm going to focus on is why the Chabad energy is very, very much Messianic, in the sense it's very focused on the Tikkun of the world. There's Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chabad Chassidism, who lived exactly which year he was born on Tav Kuf Hey in the Hebrew calendar, which is, I'm not going to try to be historically perfect right now, around 1725. Okay, yeah. Alter Rebbe is born in 1725. The first 15 years of his life, he's around when he's 18 years old, he makes his encounter with Chassidism for the first time. He doesn't meet the Baal Shem Tov, even though he lived 15 years. He was 15 years old when the holy Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Chassidic movement, passed away. He could have met him. He didn't meet him. I'm sorry, I can't say he didn't meet him. When he was a little boy, the father of the Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi was a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, but the Baal Shem Tov warned them to keep it a secret. His son was not allowed to know about it. When he was 3 years old and he got his first haircut, like it's a custom by Jewish people, he was brought to the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov blessed him and gave him his first haircut. So the Baal Shem Tov, the Alter Rebbe had within himself the incredible blessing of the founder of Chassidism. However, at the age of 18, 19, something like that, the Alter Rebbe has his first encounter with the disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, the successor of Baal Shem Tov, known as Reb Dov Ber, the Maggid of Mizrich, the holy master, who his students were the ones that brought the entire Chassidism to the entire Eastern, to Europe, and from there onward to the four corners of the earth, primarily in Eastern Europe. And these great and these disciples were like super spiritual giants, like super spiritual, all miracle workers, all like literally godly people. It's almost like God downloaded a treasure trove of souls like the world has never seen, and maybe since the Arizal's group in Safat, something like that, like super holy men, all in one shot. One of them, so you can really see the Maggid, even though he wasn't the founder of Chassidism, but he was the one who kind of set the entire, he developed it to be able to become a sustainable movement that is going to kind of redirect and the Jewish people, kind of have this enormous impact on literally besides a renaissance, a metamorphosis to a certain degree of Jewish observance. It required the second Rebbe of the Hasidic movement, who focused on developing students, which each of them was able to go to a certain place and become its masters. Now, the Alter Rebbe is the one who authored the book of Tanya, which was the first philosophical writing of Chassidism. Now, I want to just point out a couple of ideas of Tanya that very strongly emphasize the concept of fixing the world. Because as we mentioned earlier, in Judaism, there are so many different aspects that you can highlight. You can highlight that the purpose of a being over here is that the world is a test. The world is a world of darkness. The world is a world of concealment. The world is a world of evil inclination. Everything dark and unholy in the world. Man comes to this world in order to struggle with the darkness and prevail, and showing their loyalty to God, keeping the mitzvot and so on and so forth. And as a result of that, man will eventually experience a heavenly connection and intimacy with the holy and with the divine in the other world when the soul leaves the body. And that's by the way has been classical Jewish thinking throughout all the ages, that the Jewish people, the world at the time of the Middle Ages was so ugly and so dark, no one can even ever believe that such a world God would have any interest in this rough, dark, and oppressive, bloody, painful existence. So no one even thought that, meaning Judaism was very much focused on we are here to withstand the test of life so that we can go elsewhere and live a spiritual, eternal existence forever and ever. Now, even though Judaism all believed in Moshiach, but the belief of Moshiach, which Moshiach means a rectified world, or a world that is going to be at least tolerable, a world that is going to be a lot of light down here. But even that was understood primarily not as the ultimate, as the purpose, but rather as a means to an end. When I say that, I mean Maimonides writes that in his book in the Laws of Tshuva. Maimonides sees it that way. He says that, if God sees that we're trying very hard to make the best and to serve him so that we can come to heaven, so God is going to make the world in the end very beautiful so we don't have distractions, so we can serve him really, really good so we can go to heaven. So again, even though there is a certain rectification of earth, but the rectification of earth is not the purpose. Here comes Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi and kind of sets a whole new energy to the concept called Tikkun Olam, the fixing of the world. In the Alter Rebbe's philosophy, in the philosophy of Chabad, fixing the dark world, and the darker it is, the more passion and drive and what was the word I'm looking? The more passion, drive, and value there is to instilling and transforming that darkness and elevating that darkness. From the Alter Rebbe's perspective, the purpose of all of creations are not the glowing heavens, but the crass material earth. And there are so many discourses of the Alter Rebbe where he explains that even in earth itself, there are all the material things of earth, the more spiritual sides of earth. That's not the purpose. It's the earth of the earth. It's the inanimate itself is like where God's desires. It's almost like he has a deep passion that God desires. And the Alter Rebbe didn't make this up. He has all sources before him in Torah and in Judaism, midrashic sources and so on and others. But the Alter Rebbe took that particular elements of Judaism, highlighted them, and showed us how that is the pinnacle and the purpose of all of existence and all of creation. And he puts all the focus on the refinement and elevation of earth. So now we understand okay, if that's the case, we can therefore understand that a rectified society before Mashiach comes, like the United States of America, would fit really well with the Alter Rebbe's understanding of the purpose of creation. That the world, the Gentile world, the regular outside world, needs to be refined and elevated and become godly, conscious and godly godly infused and eventually holy. So in the book of Tanya, there's so much discussion about this purpose, how the bringing Hashem down into the material physical world is everything. Famous phrase, the Alter Rebbe, Nisava Kodesh Baruch Hu, God desires Lios Lo to have Dirah b'tachtonim, to have a home in the dark world. Now, if you take a look, you see that the followers of Chabad, you see that they're wired. Chabadnikim are wired to this. That's why you see that it is Chabad from everyone else that makes it a mission to reach the four corners of the globe. Sets up shops everywhere. In addition to the fact that there are Jews there and we need to do a mitzvah with the Jew, but the Rebbe emphasized so much there needs to be a visible divine presence everywhere across the planet, in every continent, in every place of the world. Comes to mind the lighting of the menorah on a beach in Sydney, Australia. Who was doing that? That's Chabadnikim. When you see a menorah being lit in a mall, that's Chabad. It's the idea of reaching into the darkness, into a world that is not aware or conscious of the divine, and bringing that godliness. The Rebbe pushed very strongly, and the Chassidim had a very hard time taking to this one, but the Rebbe very strongly, that Jews should not just spread Judaism to the Jewish people, but to spread the 7 Noahide laws to all of humanity. And that you don't find any rabbi in the world that created a movement to do that. Although it's in the Torah, it says we're supposed to do that, but Jews just didn't do that. They were terrified you'd get your head chopped off if you tried doing that. So Jews didn't do that. But the Rebbe said today's days is different. We can actually start doing that. And he inspired the concept of getting out there with Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. But it's not only in that. Take a look at the idea of engaging with the world, engaging with technology. For example, in many Jewish circles, especially the more religious Jewish circles, there is a great sense that the world is impure, unholy, and definitely technology is like super dark because you can fall into very dark stuff through technology, and therefore the best thing is abstinence. You keep away, and if you have to deal with it, you deal with it to the minimal you can, and that's it. But the Chabad philosophy, Chabad was in 1990, as soon as the internet came out, 1991, 1992, Chabad was already in cyberspace. Chabad of cyberspace. Think about how much, literally the pioneers. But it started with the Rebbe. The Rebbe was broadcasting his talks, first on radio. And the Rebbe spoke about that the deepest secrets of the Torah should be broadcasted on the radio. Now, to many religious Jews, that was almost blasphemy. Radio? With radio where you could have, because, what did radio do for people who were used to living before? I'm not even talking about television, just radio. It basically brought the non-Jewish world into the Jewish homes. So it became like, oh, this is dangerous because you're going to hear, music that is not kosher, or this that's not kosher, or certain talk that is not refined, which is going to enter in. And therefore, it's dark, it's ugly, Now, to take that and take sacred, holy Torah, that's almost like contaminating the Torah. And the Rebbe said, the radio in itself, radio waves, is a blessing. It's a creation that God gave us, an incredible technology. If God created it, it needs to be used for a purpose, for spreading Torah. The Rebbe then would give his Farbrengens, and he would be broadcasted on cable television. Television was like that was like much worse, because you're enabling immodesty to be seen and all that stuff. Yet the Rebbe was very against watching television for a religious Jew, but the Rebbe was not against using television. And as Chabad has always been the pioneers of doing that, which is kind of strange. Instead of seeing like the modern person, the shaven individual, you saw the Chabadniks with the beards to be the first ones to step on television, to step on to have radio shows. And to today's days, you see it became already kind of normative, and Jews from all are doing it, especially. But then the internet, right? So what's this? It's because the appreciation and the understanding that our job is to elevate and purify and rectify the world. Even Chabad Chassidism at its very, very core, just Chabad Chassidism versus the rest of the Chassidic world is a focus on rectifying, making the world holy. Because, when the Alter Rebbe began his brand of Chassidism, which meant intellectually understanding the divine, he got a lot of pushback from who? Not from the non-Chassidic movement. They just could not, they didn't appreciate the entire Chassidic movement. The Chabad brand and the non-Chabad brand, they felt was heresy and dangerous, and it was proven obviously all to be not true. Chassidism and the Baal Shem Tov is opening up the experience of the Ein Sof, of the unity of God, the oneness of God. He's literally bringing to the masses the light and the revelation, a foretaste already of the light of Moshiach was coming through the holy soul of the Baal Shem Tov and his students. However, the Baal Shem Tovs and his students before the Alter Rebbe kept all that light and transmitted it on the level of soul. It was transmitted just in emunah, in faith. And many of the great Hasidic masters said that if you try to bring that into the mind, you're going to contaminate it, because the mind, the human mind, human logic is limited and God is infinite. So the moment you're going to try grasping the divine with the human mind, it's like picking up the most beautiful painting and your hands are not clean, and it's how are you doing? You're ruining the whole thing. So the Alter Rebbe got a lot of pushback, but the Alter Rebbe said, no, this is the exact purpose. The exact purpose is that the world needs to be sublimated. The highest part, before we spoke about the lowest part of the world, which is the matter itself, the highest part of the world is the human mind, is the human being, and in the human being, it's the human intelligence. So we have to, when we start purifying and godly infusing godliness into the world, we start with infusing the mind and making the human mind a vessel for understanding and appreciating infinite ideas. And that's Chassidism. It's a magical combination. It's the human mind stretching to accommodate the infinite and to fun. And through the purification and sanctification of the mind through Chabad Chassidism, it then travels further down into the realm of the human emotions, to elevate the human emotions, and eventually all the way down. But one of the most amazing things about Tanya is that the Alter Rebbe so focuses not on spiritual experiences for the sake of the spiritual experience on its own. To the Alter Rebbe, and that's the energy you get when you study Tanya, it's all about that your emotions, your holy godly emotions, which is love of God and fear of God, has to translate into observance, into doing things in the physical world that are godly. There's no book in Judaism that so celebrates the act of a mitzvah. Just, for example, take a look at the Chabadnikim that, appreciate so much that when you get a Jew on an airplane or on the street corner to put on tefillin one time. And many people look at it, if you didn't learn Chabad Chassidism, you look at it and you say, you didn't change the person, you didn't affect their emotions, you didn't even change their mindset. They might still be the same heretic, or they maybe never believed in God, or whatever it is, and they're just doing you a favor, they're getting a picture, or whatever it is. So what's the significance of that action? Yet to a Chabadnik, to someone who studied Chassidus, that's everything. Because a place that wasn't godly has now been infused with the divine will, and God is resting in that physical action. And to God it is so much meaningful because God never entered that space in a revealed way until today. The person who puts on the tefillin every day, God goes there every day when the person is wearing the tefillin. But this guy, God never entered into their body, and now they're doing the mitzvah. So the Alter Rebbe so valued and so emphasized the action. To the Alter Rebbe, spiritual ecstasy and experiences that don't lead to action, they're nice and they're wonderful, but they're not satisfying to God, and you're not following the purpose for why God created you. And that itself can become a distraction in your life. Now, you should know that in other Hasidic circles, in many Hasidic books, there is value given just for the love and the fear, just for the experience. The experience itself stands on its own. doesn't need to be brought into action. But the Alter Rebbe puts it in the headlines of his book. He bases his entire book of Tanya. This matter is very close. The ficha in your mouth, so to do that. He focuses all of Judaism just on behavior and on action, enriched by emotions, because when you're going to have the emotion will elevate the action, but the primary goal is the action. Why? Because Tikkun Olam, fixing the world, is where it's at. God wants this material, non-Jewish world to become holy. Now, being that that's the case, we can therefore understand how philosophically the concept of elevating the United States of America, creating a society that is more refined and elevated, would have a relationship. Because you can be a Jew and say, I couldn't care less what's going on with the world. Let the world, plummet into darkness. As long as I can do my mitzvahs and I can study my Torah and I'm going to my heaven, I'm okay. But the concern for the world to be rectified is again, I'm not saying it's only Chabad. It exists in Judaism, but in the Alter Rebbe's philosophy, it literally becomes everything. And this only intensified through the 7 generations of Chabad, and by the Rebbe, with all the mitzvah campaigns, it reached its zenith, it reached its climax, about bringing holiness into the physical. Okay, with that in mind, let's first now draw the connections between seeing if, theoretically it's a great idea, but what's the really relationship? So, America was founded in 1796. What happened with the Alter Rebbe in 1796? Well, the Alter Rebbe, in this book, there's a special book. I'm bringing a book over here where I took this from. There's a book called Sefer HaToldos. Okay, this is a book. It's got I think 15 volumes, something like that, and it follows all it's the history, basically, a very, very thorough historical. It's in Hebrew of all the Chabad Rebbes, and this one, I'm not even the Chabad. All the starting with the Baal Shem Tov, the 9 generations. Chabad is 7 generations, but preceding that is the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid. There's books that discuss. So in this book, Sefer HaToldos, in the 2nd volume, right at the beginning, he's bringing over here something really interesting. He says like this: in the year 1796, there was a general assembly. I think this is brought from the previous Chabad Rebbe's writings. Okay? So he says in the year 1796, Tav Kuf Lamed Vav, which is the year 5536 in the Hebrew calendar. This is 3 years after the passing of the Maggid of Mizrich, as we discussed earlier, was the 2nd Rebbe of Chassidism. So when he passed away, the students went, and each one went spread out to the various different places, locations, and they became teachers and masters to bring the new Chassidic teachings to their communities. But they made up that they didn't have any more a central Rebbe. It kind of, Chassidism now split. I don't want to say splintered. It didn't splinter, but it branched out. Better word. It branched out into more local teachers, local masters that were going to disseminate the deeper Torah and the great light, this great holy, godly light. Each of them in their place. But they made up that after 3 years they would reconvene, because they were having tremendous opposition, so they needed to really kind of strategize of how they were going to infiltrate into the Jewish communities, and how the best to do it in a way that people will be curious to know what it's about and open up to it instead of fight it. And also, what are the things that Chassidism should? It was a new movement, and it needed to be clarified, like what exactly is the right way. And that's why you see these differences. Not all Chassidic movements have this, Chassidic groups have the same emphasis. It's different, but it all is drinking from the same fountain, from the holy Baal Shem Tov. Now is not the place to go in and to explain that. Now, they made up that 3 years later, which comes out to be the Maggid passed away in 1773. So 3 years later, in 1776, they had a conference of all the great Rebbes. At that conference, one of the things he brings over here, they decided 2 things regarding that the Alter Rebbe would become the chief master of disseminating Chassidism in Lithuania. Now that was like the most challenging place because that's where the headquarters of the old school was situated, and great scholars. So the great scholars amongst the Jewish people were giving a lot of pushback to this suspicious new spiritual movement that was kind of in Judaism. Everything that you introduce that's new, that's a little bit new, and there's right away a lot of suspicion. And Jews are feisty, and they can fight. So there was the most intense opposition against Chassidism was in Lithuania, the city of Vilna, and the great rabbis there. So they knew they needed someone, the ensemble of Hasidic tzaddikim, they knew they need someone who can match up in his scholarly brilliance to the greatest geniuses that were there in Lithuania. So you couldn't dismiss and say that Hasidism, which was one of the accusations, they don't emphasize Torah study. They emphasize all kinds of other stuff, but not Torah study. So therefore, they needed like the Alter Rebbe to be able to challenge them in debates and so on and so forth. So they put him there. But another thing they decided, here's very special, that the Alter Rebbe would become the general manager of all the Hasidic movements. In other words, even though they're not accepting the Alter Rebbe as their spiritual leader, that is like the Rebbe for all the, where they all give their souls over with a deep bond, like a Chassid and a Rebbe. They had superstars. They had like the greatest Rebbes for every place, but still they needed a CEO. They needed a manager. They appointed the Alter Rebbe to be the top manager of all the Hasidic branches. Which means, in a sense, that since Chassidism later became the super energy of the Jewish people, it really means that the Alter Rebbe is now the leader of the Jewish people, and on a deep level, because he's the CEO of the Hasidic movement. Which now it didn't last too long, because there was rebellion. And again, as I said later, a lot of the people later, when the Alter Rebbe developed more his philosophy, they thought they became suspicious. And there were other reasons that the Alter Rebbe did not remain the CEO of the entire. But at least at that time, he was established in 1796. It was given to the Alter Rebbe. Now, when they once gave it to him, now when I say it didn't last, it did last. Spiritually, it lasted, because Chabad Chassidus today has tremendous influence on all other Hasidic groups as well. I'm not going to get into it on a very deep level. So the Alter Rebbe is still, to a certain degree, the manager of all of the Hasidic world, no question. But there was something else that happened in 1796, is that although historically, when we look at when the Alter Rebbe developed his new outlook of Chassidism and kind of germinated the concept of the book of the Tanya and so on and so forth, that is attributed to the year 1772. While his teacher was still alive, the Alter Rebbe was already germinating the ideas of Chabad and maybe started teaching them. However, he did not have a physical location from where he would teach his brand of Chassidus. In 1776 is where he set up the first Chassidic center, which would become his yeshiva, where he invited scholars from all of the neighborhood. Everybody should come study under his auspices, where he would give them a method of learning, a direction in life, and so on and so forth. Which really means that in 1776, the first Chabad center was established, when at the same time, thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean, on the other side of the planet, the United States declares its Declaration of Independence. There is a very interesting correlation that both these things happen at the same year. Now, this is not too of a strong argument, just because they both happened at the same year. When we follow the rest of the correlations, we will see it becomes stunningly magical of how connected it is. There is a very interesting discourse. Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi in 1802, in I think it was springtime in 1802, the Alter Rebbe gives a interesting discourse where he discusses America, a Hasidic discourse discussing America. Why was America important at that time? Jews were not there. Jews started migrating to the United States. I mean, there were Jews there, but it was almost like, a prophetic vision that Jews are going to go to America. We need to understand America. And he gives a very interesting discourse about America and about in that discourse, there's like the seeds of the understanding that the United States of America is going to be one day the headquarters of the Jewish people. And the United States of America plays a very, very important role in the sublimation of the world. I'm going to share that with you, but I'm realizing I'm running out of time, and I'd rather share that with you in next class, because that's deep and that will take a couple of minutes to explain and to share. So I'm going to leave that for the next presentation. But what I just first want to lay out the chronicle connections between. So in 1802, the Alter Rebbe gives this whole concept of America. There's also an interesting story told. Now, this is not documented in the previous Rebbe's diaries or talks, but it is handed down through Chassidim. That when the Alter Rebbe was arrested by the Russian Tsarist government, they tested him because they saw that he had a brilliant man who knew everything, and they asked him all kinds of questions. One of the things that they were excited in the Tsar's company was, at that time, they had produced a new map of North America. A new map. Now I looked up on Google and I said, give me the history of maps. I wanted to see if there's really maps were coming out at that time. So really the first maps of the United States were already in the 1500s. But not the United States yet. It wasn't the United States. It was North America. And then they had at various different times. But it does say, I mean, at least Google gives me that, or AI gives me that from right after the American Revolution in 1776, which was in 1776. So from 1780 to 1790, quite a few updates of maps were made of North America and so on and so forth. It was becoming more of something that was being made. So it makes sense that while the Alter Rebbe was in prison, the Alter Rebbe was arrested in 1798, and then again in 1801. So that these maps were studied in Europe. This was a new map that came out at that time, and they showed it to the Alter Rebbe to ask him on what he thinks about this map of America. I guess they were testing him in geography. The Alter Rebbe looked at the map, and again, someone said it was actually on the West Coast. How they had him, that he made a comment on it. He said that something is inaccurate in that map. They first laughed it off, and they thought like, oh, what is he? How is he going to tell you? What does he know? He's never been there. How in the world would he know what it looks like? They did some research and came back, and that he was actually, that an edit was made, and he was right, that it was exactly like he said. So when they asked him, how does he know? So the Alter Rebbe said, interesting, he said that in the first letter of the Torah, it begins with the word Bereshis, which is the beginning, the base of the word Bereshis, which is the beginning, which means in the beginning when God created. That base contains within it a map of the entire cosmic order. So from looking over there, I saw that the map of the America was not exactly correct. Now I'm thinking that's awesome, but why? If you got a map of the cosmos, why are you studying and analyzing the United States of America? Why not just analyze the great, bright, brilliant, spiritual worlds that go on endlessly without an end? If that's all written in that base, you can spend a lifetime exploring that map of the entire spiritual cosmos. Yet the Alter Rebbe is fixated on America. And you can say he scanned everything and he got it all. I think he actually was looking for America because he knew something about the United States of America. He speaks about it in that discourse. There is something there that has to do with his teachings. Okay. Fast forward. The year is 1929. Sixth Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak of Chabad, just comes out from after he was just liberated from the Russian, from the Soviets who arrested him, and as we discussed in one of the earlier classes, and we'll talk about it more. And they wanted to, they saw him as the enemy of the state, like the top enemy of the USSR. And they had all kinds of accusations against him. And again, the story is miraculously the Rebbe came out of it and was saved, but he had to leave Russia. But he left over an entire operation inspired by him to continue Judaism in the cellars of the USSR, underground. But in any case, at that time, in 1929, 2 years later, the previous Chabad Rebbe came to America to visit. It was a visit. He was here for a few months. And first he went to Israel. Also, it was the first time a Chabad Rebbe went to Israel. From Israel, he traveled to America, and he was there for a few months. Then he came back to Europe. Now, the purpose of the trip, some say, is, again, I'm not a historian, so you can probably go look up and get more. But it had to do, first of all, the previous Rebbe was trying to make his next move, where he was going to move. In the end, he chose to move to Poland for 10 years, and then eventually came to America in 1940 because the Holocaust set Europe on fire, and the previous Rebbe had to flee. He came to America and laid his foundation here. So, but some say, I think that the previous Rebbe, or he came to strengthen. There were already Chabad, Chassidim, and Jews in America, where the Frierdiker Rebbe came to strengthen them and give them inspiration. Also to raise money for his institutions back in Europe that were in dire need of help. Whatever the reason is, the previous Rebbe came to America, spent a couple of months over here, I think, and traveled to various cities. He went to Chicago, he went to St. Louis. Obviously, he came to New York, but he was in Chicago, he went to St. Louis, and he even met with President Hoover, as I mentioned the other day. During this visit, one of the main, very, very special places the previous Rebbe went was he came to Philadelphia. When he came to Philadelphia, he came and he visited. He came and he visited. They took him. He had a huge entourage, and they brought him to City Hall. The police were there. Everybody kind of made a massive escort. The previous Rebbe describes in his diary that there were at least 100 cars, which was a lot, following this as he was being taken from the train station. He went by train from New York City to Philadelphia, and then over there he went to visit Independence Hall. It's a beautiful description because he's contrasting in his own diary how they treated him. That a few years earlier, he had an escort dragging him off to a prison in the oppressive USSR. And he's saying, take a look at these two cultures. Here they celebrate freedom, and I'm being so honored as a Jewish rabbi amongst the Gentile people. They're honoring me, they're celebrating me. And over here, I was treated like trampling, like God forbid, like the worst. He says how much, it's beautiful. He says, how much gratitude do I have for this country? He speaks about America. He's basically looking at humans that have a face of a human. They're not looking like those brutes that he left over in this. He's seeing a new human being. He comes to the Independence Hall. He sits down. They honored him by sitting on George Washington's chair, where George Washington sat during overseeing the writing of the Declaration of Independence. And the previous Rebbe, while he's sitting on George Washington's chair, gives a blessing to America. And the blessing to America, he blesses America, and he says that true freedom is freedom that's based on deep religious convictions, or on a faith of God. The word I used was actually religion, but one of the interesting things I failed to say, when he was coming to Independence Hall, the previous Rebbe said, all my life, I so wanted to come to the place of the birth, and he used the term, the Geulah. Geulah is like the cradle of American freedom. Why is a Rebbe, he's a tzaddik, why is he so intrigued by American freedom? You see, he has this deep admiration for the United States of America, so much so that he sits on George Washington's chair. He wasn't doing that for a selfie. He's a holy tzaddik. Everything he's doing has a divine, as complete godly intent. He's honored to sit because the reason they honored him to sit on that chair, even though regular people were not allowed, is because they saw him as a freedom fighter, because he fought the oppression of religion back in the USSR. So they honored him, the Rebbe. They let him sit there, and also because of who he was. Then he went to visit the Liberty Bell. He went to, or they call it Liberty, the Liberty, I don't know exactly the name. They moved the bell since then. When I was there now, they moved it to a different location. But then it was in Independence Hall, but a certain section. He went to see that bell. He laid a wreath of flowers at that bell. And he was, and this was one of his visits. So, Rebbes are godly people. They don't waste time. A man like him who's busy, very busy, if he makes this visit and he went there, and he writes about it with such, admiration, is because he sees it as something very, very, very significant and very, very meaningful. So that's something to notice. The next thing, and then again, in 1940, he comes to America. He accepts American citizenship. There's beautiful pictures and even, I think, clips of where they have it on film as well, of the previous Rebbe signing the papers, and he dresses in Shabbos clothing. It's really, he wears his Shabbos fur hat. You see that this is like a day where he's treating it like a tremendous honor that he's being accepted as an American citizen. It's something deep. There's something fundamental over here. And then spends 10 years of his life in America, declaring that America is not going to be ignorant of Torah and unholy, but America is going to be transformed. He makes that declaration. And we're going to spread Judaism and holiness, and that was the previous Rebbe's mission. But he passes away in 1950. And then in 1951, his successor, 7th Chabad Rebbe, becomes Rebbe. Now, the 7th Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, known as the Rebbe, I'm just going to share one insight about him in America. First of all, the Rebbe spoke so fondly of the United States of America by many Farbringans, especially when he was talking about the importance of trying to influence public schools. The Rebbe was very concerned with education of the American school system. And the Rebbe wanted very much that American children should have moments of prayer, because that's the only way, the Rebbe said, you're going to secure a God-fearing, noble, moral society, is that people pray. When the Rebbe got tremendous pushback at that, because, it's separation of church and state, so the Rebbe was trying to settle at least on moment of silence in all schools. And in many places it has been actually put into the Rebbe moment of silence. And the Rebbe explained that children will ask their parents what to think. And most parents will tell them, think about what's important. Think about there is a God. Think about that, you need to be a contributing citizen and live with a consciousness of a higher authority. Let every parent teach their children, but let there be a moment in silence in school. The Rebbe fought for it. Now, over there, against the argument that that America is, we can't put religion in, the Rebbe said, it is so against the grain of what the United States of America is. The United States of America was born from the founding fathers were so deeply devout. They so believed in God. They so cherished God. Not only God as existence of God, but God as someone who's directing the human being down here below. God as someone who is in a relationship with us. God is someone that we need to take into account every single day in our choices. And the Rebbe emphasizes so strongly in his talks. It's really special to watch. He actually says that the many pilgrims came to America just for the sake so that they can worship freely without any oppression. But then he says something really special, is that so much so is it so imprinted in USA consciousness. The idea of under God is that it's even printed on the most powerful entity that runs the United States, which is the United States economy, and the dollar. Literally, the dollar has God's signature on it. In God we trust. To the Rebbe, that was everything. And again, think about the idea of Chabad Chassidism. Money is the epitome of that can be the source of corruption. Money corrupts, and no. Money has God's imprint on it, because there's a recognition that every dollar that I make, we trust in God. God is the one who gave us this ability. So we should use the money for good things. This is hugely, whether it's impacting people subconsciously or consciously, but the fact that it's imprinted on the United States currency, which is the most powerful currency in the world, which is and it's actually, there's no question that the dollar is blessed because God is on the dollar bill. It's blessed by God. That's why the United States is so successful. But the Rebbe cherished this so much. I'm going to conclude that in a letter that the Rebbe writes to President George Bush, who honored the Rebbe in the year 1991, the Rebbe was celebrating his 50th anniversary of the Rebbe arriving to America. So George Bush and his wife, what was her name? The first George Bush, I forgot what was her, Barbara Bush. So Barbara, right, Barbara is George Bush Sr.'s wife, first lady, right? So they sent the Rebbe a letter honoring his 50th anniversary of coming to America. The Rebbe responds in this letter, and he says these words, very special. It's a nice, beautiful letter. You can look it up. I welcome especially your remarks, my dear President, as your tribute to the Lubavitch movement, which I am privileged to head. That it has grown and flourished in this country is a testimony to the conductive climate and responsive human nature that combine to ensure that all positive efforts are abundantly fruitful. But hear these words. By divine providence, your kind letter was dated on the morrow of the anniversary of the nation's birthday. It is, so in other words, George Bush sent this to the Rebbe on July 5th. So the Rebbe says, it is well to remember that the founders of this nation considered Independence Day as a day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. Okay, so now watch this. So the Rebbe says, you should remember this. Because the Rebbe, as we told you, keeps on reminding America, stay true to your roots. Then he continues and he says, by divine providence, also, my arrival in the United States in 1941, which was on July 23rd, I think. I'm sorry, June 23rd, 1941, just a few days before July 4th, 1941, coincided with the declaration by Congress that year, making July 4th a legal public holiday. So if you look at the history of July 4th, you see that July 4th was officially established as a holiday in 1870. But it wasn't a paid holiday for federal workers. It was just a legal holiday. In 1938, Congress officially declared and passed the bill that 4th of July should be a paid holiday for all federal workers. But they upgraded that in 1941. And since 1941, there was no more ratification to that. They included that also the federal workers of District of Columbia, which I don't know why they were not included, are also included. That happened in 1941. So the Rebbe says, listen, the Rebbe makes a point to George Bush that my coming to America has something to do with the completion of celebrating the declaration of the 4th of July, Independence Day. Now, the Rebbe is not being cute. The Rebbe is not trying to find something to find favor in the eyes. No. The Rebbe is saying something fundamental. The Rebbe says, you should know that me coming here has something to do with the United States reaching its full celebration or a potential in being what it needs to be. Now, there are some incredible, deep elements that I didn't speak of yet, and we're going to roll that over to the next class. A fascinating series of teachings that went through the Chabad Rebbes, from the Alter Rebbe to the 6th Rebbe. And the 6th Rebbe, you can see, appoints his son-in-law to be the one who rectifies America. So you can, to completion, to elevate the United States of America towards Moshiach. It is phenomenal. But I was hoping to finish all this over here, but takes a little more time. So we're going to roll that over into next class, which is really going to be on a different topic, but first 20 minutes is still going to be a continuation. So join us, Be'ezus Hashem, for class number 5. Thank you.